Most people underestimate small wins because small wins look unimpressive in the beginning. Saving your first $100, paying off a tiny debt, skipping one impulse purchase, investing a small amount, waking up earlier, building one better habit. None of those things feel life-changing immediately. And honestly, that's why many people quit too early. Because modern culture has trained people to only respect dramatic results. Big money, big success, big transformations. But real change usually starts invisibly, quietly. That's something I wish I understood earlier. Because for years, I thought progress only counted if it looked impressive. If results weren't dramatic, I assumed nothing meaningful was happening. That mindset quietly destroyed my consistency. I would start financial goals with massive motivation, extreme budgets, aggressive saving plans, huge expectations. And for a short period, I'd feel productive, disciplined, in control. But eventually, reality always showed up. Unexpected expenses, stress, exhaustion, slow progress. And that's where everything collapsed. Not because the goals were impossible, because the progress felt emotionally invisible. That's the dangerous stage of growth. The stage where improvement is happening, but you can't fully see it yet. Most people quit there. Not only financially. In almost every part of life. Fitness, business, self-improvement, investing. Because human beings crave visible rewards quickly. We want proof immediately. And when results arrive slowly, our brains start questioning the process. Is this even working? That question destroys more progress than failure itself. I remember one specific moment that changed my perspective completely. I had been trying to improve my finances for months. Nothing dramatic had happened. I wasn't rich. I wasn't financially free. My account balance still looked small. And honestly, part of me felt discouraged constantly. Then one night, I noticed something strange. A few months earlier, an unexpected expense would have completely destroyed me financially. But now, I handled it calmly. No panic. No overdraft. No desperation. That moment looked tiny from the outside. But psychologically, it was huge. Because for the first time, I realized progress had been happening invisibly. My life wasn't transformed overnight. But my stability had improved. And stability matters more than people realize. That experience changed how I viewed small wins forever. Because suddenly, I understood something powerful. Small wins are important because they create evidence. Evidence that your behavior is changing. Evidence that your future is changing. Evidence that you are becoming someone different. That's why tiny progress matters psychologically. It changes identity slowly. And identity controls long-term behavior. For example, someone who saves money consistently doesn't just build savings. They slowly build the identity of someone who handles money responsibly. That internal shift changes future decisions naturally. The same thing happens with discipline. The first workout feels tiny. The first investment feels tiny. The first productive habit feels tiny. But repeated consistently, those tiny actions reshape identity completely. And honestly, identity is one of the most powerful forces in human behavior. Because people naturally act in alignment with who they believe they are. If someone believes, "I'm terrible with money," they unconsciously reinforce that identity through behavior. Overspending, avoidance, financial inconsistency. But small wins interrupt that pattern. They slowly introduce a new internal belief. Maybe I can improve. That possibility changes everything. And honestly, hope is more important than many people realize. Because hopelessness destroys consistency faster than failure does. Once people feel hopeless, they stop trying entirely. That's why small victories matter emotionally. They protect momentum, and momentum is incredibly powerful psychologically. One tiny success often creates another, then another, then another. At first, the changes feel microscopic. But over time, they begin compounding. That's something most people misunderstand about success. Big transformations rarely happen through giant moments. They happen through tiny repeated behaviors compounded over years. That's true financially, emotionally, physically, mentally. Everything compounds. Habits compound. Confidence compounds. Discipline compounds. Even self-respect compounds. That realization completely changed how I approached personal growth. I stopped obsessing over dramatic outcomes and started respecting consistency instead. Because consistency creates predictable transformation, not immediate transformation. Predictable transformation. There's a huge difference. Modern culture makes people emotionally addicted to instant success. Fast money, fast results, fast fame, fast improvement. And honestly, that mindset quietly destroys patience. People begin treating slow progress like failure. But slow progress is often the most stable type of progress. That's something investing taught me deeply. At first, investing feels painfully boring. The numbers barely move. Growth looks invisible. And emotionally, that stage feels frustrating. That's why many people stop investing early. Because they underestimate the power of time. But eventually, compound growth starts becoming visible. And suddenly, the tiny actions repeated consistently start looking powerful. That's how many parts of life work. Results are invisible until they're undeniable. The problem is, most people quit during the invisible stage. That's why small wins deserve more respect. Because small wins help people survive the invisible stage emotionally. They provide psychological reinforcement. Proof that effort matters. Proof that movement is happening. Even if slowly. And honestly, slowly is completely okay. That's one of the biggest lessons I had to learn financially. Because I used to compare my progress constantly. Social media made everything worse. Everyone online seemed successful immediately. Young millionaires, fast businesses, luxury lifestyles, perfect lives. Meanwhile, my own progress felt painfully ordinary. Tiny savings increases, tiny improvements, tiny habits. At times, it almost felt embarrassing. But eventually, I realized something dangerous about comparison. Comparison makes ordinary progress feel meaningless. And ordinary progress is exactly what builds extraordinary results over time. That realization changed everything. Because once I stopped chasing dramatic transformation, I finally became consistent. And consistency changed my life far more than motivation ever did. I think one of the biggest reasons people ignore small wins is because small wins don't create instant emotional excitement. They're quiet, subtle, almost boring. But honestly, boring progress is often the most sustainable kind. And sustainability matters more than intensity long term. That's true financially too. Most wealth isn't built dramatically. It's built quietly. Tiny investments, tiny savings habits, tiny behavioral improvements repeated consistently over years. That's why financial freedom often looks unimpressive in the beginning. Because growth happens invisibly first, then suddenly. That invisible stage exists in almost every meaningful achievement. And surviving that stage emotionally is one of the most important skills anyone can develop. Because if you can stay consistent without immediate rewards, you become extremely dangerous long term. Most people cannot do that. Most people need constant validation to continue. Constant proof. Constant excitement. But long-term success often requires working without visible rewards for extended periods. That's why discipline matters so much. Not intense discipline. Quiet discipline, the kind nobody notices initially. Looking back now, many of the biggest improvements in my life started from embarrassingly small changes. Saving tiny amounts consistently. Reading a few pages daily. Improving habits slowly. Making slightly better decisions repeatedly. At the time, none of those things felt life-changing. Years later, they changed everything. That's the hidden power of small wins. They don't look powerful immediately. But over time, they completely transform direction. And direction matters more than speed. That sentence changed my life once I truly understood it, because most people obsess over speed. Fast success, fast improvement, fast wealth. But direction determines where you eventually arrive, not speed alone. Even tiny progress in the right direction matters enormously over long periods of time. That's why consistency beats intensity so often. Intensity creates temporary change. Consistency creates permanent change. And permanent change usually looks boring while it's happening. That's the irony. The things that transform your life most dramatically often feel unimpressive day to day. Until one day, you look back and realize your entire life changed slowly. That realization is powerful because it teaches patience. And patience protects long-term thinking. Without patience, people chase emotional shortcuts constantly. And shortcuts usually create instability. But slow growth creates strong foundations. Emotionally, financially, mentally. That's why I no longer underestimate tiny progress. Even a small improvement matters. Because small improvements repeated consistently change identity. And identity changes future behavior automatically. That's where real transformation begins. Quietly. Internally. Long before the outside world notices anything. And honestly, that's why small wins matter so much. Not because they look impressive. Because they quietly change who you become. One of the hardest things about financial growth is that the beginning feels emotionally unrewarding. Nobody celebrates your first emergency fund. Nobody notices your first small investment. Nobody applauds when you finally stop impulse spending. Those victories are private, invisible, quiet. And honestly, that invisibility makes consistency difficult. Because human beings naturally crave recognition. We want proof that effort matters. That's why social media affects people psychologically so deeply. It constantly exposes people to visible success, luxury, status, rapid transformation. And over time, that exposure quietly distorts expectations. People stop respecting gradual improvement. Slow growth begins feeling inadequate. And honestly, I struggled with that mindset for years. I thought success had to look dramatic to matter. If the progress wasn't obvious, I assumed it was meaningless. That belief quietly kept me trapped. Because it made me emotionally impatient. And impatience destroys long-term financial behavior, especially investing, especially saving, especially self-improvement. Because the most valuable things in life often grow slowly. Very slowly. I remember when I first started trying to build savings consistently. The numbers felt tiny, almost embarrassing. And emotionally, it was difficult not to compare myself to other people. Friends buying expensive things. People online showing financial success constantly. Meanwhile, I was celebrating tiny milestones privately. And honestly, sometimes that felt discouraging. But eventually, I realized something important. Most people only respect outcomes. Very few people respect process. That realization changed the way I viewed discipline completely. Because process is where transformation actually happens. Not in the visible reward. The reward simply reveals years of repeated behavior. That's why successful people often seem suddenly successful. But nothing happened suddenly. The repetition was simply invisible to outsiders. That's true financially too. People notice wealth late. They rarely notice the years of consistency beforehand. The boring years. The patient years. The unnoticed years. Those years matter most. And honestly, that's why small wins deserve emotional respect. Because they help you continue during periods where results still look invisible. They create emotional reinforcement. A reminder that movement is happening. Even if slowly. That's incredibly important psychologically. Because progress changes people emotionally before it changes them externally. The first time you save money consistently, you feel different. The first time you avoid emotional spending, you feel different. The first time you invest despite fear, you feel different. Those emotional shifts matter enormously. Because behavior change becomes easier once identity starts changing too. That's something many people misunderstand about discipline. Discipline is easier when actions align with identity. If someone identifies as a person improving financially, their behavior gradually changes naturally. But identity doesn't shift instantly. It shifts through repeated evidence, repeated small wins. That's why tiny victories matter so much psychologically. They are identity evidence. Proof that change is real. Proof that you are becoming different. I think that's why many people sabotage themselves after small progress. Because deep down, their identity still hasn't caught up yet. Success feels unfamiliar. Improvement feels temporary. So subconsciously, they return to old patterns. Old spending habits. Old thinking. Old emotional reactions. That cycle repeats constantly in personal finance. And honestly, breaking that cycle requires patience. Not perfection. Patience. Because identity transformation takes time. Longer than people expect. But once identity shifts, consistency becomes much easier. That's why I stopped focusing only on outcomes and started paying attention to patterns instead. Patterns reveal direction. And direction matters enormously over long periods. For example, someone investing small amounts monthly for years is building more than wealth. They're building financial identity. Someone consistently improving habits is building self-trust. Someone repeatedly choosing long-term thinking is reshaping their future psychologically. Those changes compound invisibly. That's the key word, compound. People understand compound interest financially, but they underestimate psychological compounding completely. Confidence compounds. Self-discipline compounds. Emotional stability compounds. Even self-respect compounds. And the beginning always looks small. That's why people underestimate it. Looking back now, many moments that changed my life felt insignificant while they were happening. Tiny decisions. Tiny habits. Tiny improvements. But repeated consistently, they changed my direction entirely. That's why I believe small wins matter more than dramatic motivation. Motivation feels powerful emotionally, but it's unstable. Small consistent actions create stability. And stability creates transformation. One of the most dangerous beliefs people have is thinking they need to completely change overnight. That mindset creates pressure. And pressure creates burnout. Especially financially. People attempt impossible budgets, extreme restrictions, aggressive goals. Then eventually, they collapse emotionally. Not because improvement is impossible, because the approach wasn't sustainable. That's why small sustainable wins matter more than extreme temporary behavior. Because sustainable behavior survives difficult seasons. And difficult seasons always come eventually. Stress, exhaustion, unexpected setbacks. Life changes. The people who continue progressing during those periods usually rely on systems and habits, not emotional intensity. That realization changed my entire approach to growth. I stopped asking, "How do I transform my life immediately?" and started asking, "What small behaviors can I repeat consistently for years?" That question created much better results. Because long-term thinking changes behavior dramatically. You stop chasing emotional highs and start respecting stability instead. That's especially important financially. Because wealth building is often emotionally boring. That's something people rarely say honestly. Investing consistently is boring sometimes. Saving consistently is boring sometimes. Avoiding lifestyle inflation is boring sometimes. But boring behaviors repeated long enough become powerful. Extremely powerful. And honestly, that's one of the biggest mindset shifts that improved my financial life. I stopped needing every step to feel exciting. I stopped expecting dramatic progress constantly. And strangely, that's when my results became more stable. Because emotionally sustainable behavior lasts longer. That's the real secret behind many successful people. Not intensity. Longevity. The ability to continue when results still look small. that skill changes everything. Because eventually, small progress compounds into visible transformation. Then people call you lucky. But the truth is, most visible success was built quietly long before anybody noticed it. That applies to money, health, business, self-improvement, everything meaningful. That's why I respect small wins now. Because small wins are usually early signs of future transformation, even when the outside world sees nothing yet. And honestly, learning to appreciate invisible progress changed my life emotionally. Because once you stop needing immediate validation, you become far more resilient long term. You stop quitting every time progress feels slow. You stop comparing constantly. You stop treating ordinary growth like failure. And that emotional stability creates enormous advantages over time. That's why small wins matter so much. Not because they look impressive, but because they teach patience, consistency, self-trust, and long-term thinking. Those qualities quietly build extraordinary futures. One of the biggest financial mistakes people make is quitting too early, not because they lack intelligence, not because they lack potential, because they underestimate slow progress emotionally. That's something I understand deeply now, because there were multiple times in my life where I almost gave up on improving financially completely. The progress felt too small, too slow, too invisible. And honestly, part of me believed nothing meaningful was changing. But looking back now, those periods were actually shaping my future the most. That's the strange thing about growth. While it's happening, it rarely feels dramatic. Most transformation feels repetitive, quiet, ordinary. And that's exactly why people underestimate it. Human beings naturally crave emotional stimulation. We want visible rewards, fast proof, exciting breakthroughs. But sustainable success often grows through repetition instead. Tiny repeated decisions, tiny repeated habits, tiny repeated improvements. That repetition becomes powerful over time, especially financially. For example, one small investing habit may not look impressive today, but repeated over years, it can completely change someone's future. One tiny improvement in spending habits may feel insignificant today, but repeated consistently, it can create financial stability that completely changes someone's stress levels. That's why direction matters so much. Because tiny behaviors determine long-term trajectory, and trajectory quietly shapes entire lives. I think many people don't realize how much emotional damage comes from constantly restarting. Starting over financially, starting over with habits, starting over with goals. That cycle becomes exhausting psychologically. And eventually, people lose confidence in themselves. That's why small consistent wins matter emotionally. They rebuild self-trust slowly. And self-trust changes behavior dramatically. Once you trust yourself, discipline becomes easier. Long-term thinking becomes easier. Consistency becomes easier. Because now your actions align with belief. That internal alignment is powerful. I remember a time when I didn't trust myself financially at all. Every budget failed. Every saving plan collapsed. Every goal felt temporary. Eventually, I started believing I was simply bad with money. That identity became dangerous. Because identity shapes expectations. And expectations shape behavior. But slowly, small wins interrupted that story. Saving tiny amounts consistently. Making slightly better decisions. Avoiding impulsive habits occasionally. Those moments seemed tiny. But psychologically, they mattered enormously. Because they introduced doubt into my negative self-image. Maybe I wasn't hopeless financially. Maybe I was improving slowly. That possibility changed everything. Because hopelessness is one of the most destructive emotional states financially. Hopeless people stop planning, stop investing, stop trying. And honestly, many people carry quiet hopelessness around money without admitting it. They assume financial freedom only belongs to other people. Smarter people. Luckier people. People born into better situations. But small wins challenge that belief. They create evidence that progress is possible, even if gradual. That's why I believe consistency matters more than intensity long term. Intensity creates emotional excitement. Consistency creates results. Real results. Stable results. Results that survive difficult seasons. And difficult seasons always arrive eventually. That's another reason small wins matter. They help you continue during hard periods. Because life is unpredictable. Stressful seasons happen. Unexpected setbacks happen. Financial emergencies happen. And during those moments, tiny stable habits become incredibly valuable. That's why I stopped chasing perfection. Perfection is emotionally fragile. One mistake destroys it. But consistency survives imperfection. That mindset changed everything for me. Because once I stopped needing perfect progress, I finally became more stable emotionally. And emotional stability improves financial behavior dramatically. You stop panic spending. You stop self-sabotaging after mistakes. You stop treating setbacks like total failure. Instead, you continue moving forward slowly. That's powerful. Especially over years. I think one reason small wins feel emotionally weak initially is because people focus too heavily on immediate outcomes. Immediate money. Immediate change. Immediate results. But life is heavily shaped by delayed outcomes. The problem is, delayed outcomes require patience. And patience has become extremely rare. Especially online. Everything today encourages speed. Fast success. Fast wealth. Fast transformation. But honestly, most meaningful growth happens slower than people expect. That's not bad news. It's reality. And accepting reality creates better long-term behavior. Because once you stop expecting overnight transformation, you become more patient with gradual improvement. That patience creates resilience. And resilience changes lives. I've noticed something interesting about financially successful people. Many of them respect boring behaviors. Consistency. Patience. Routine. Long-term thinking. Those qualities rarely look exciting publicly. But privately, they create stability. That's why real wealth often grows quietly first. And honestly, quiet growth is underrated. Not every improvement needs applause. Not every habit needs validation. Some of the most important changes happen privately. Internally. Slowly. That's where identity transformation begins. Long before visible rewards appear. And once identity changes, behavior becomes easier naturally. Someone who identifies as healthy behaves differently. Someone who identifies as financially responsible behaves differently. Someone who identifies as disciplined behaves differently. Identity drives action. That's why small wins matter so much psychologically. They slowly rewrite identity. And rewritten identity creates rewritten futures. Looking back now, I can clearly see how tiny moments changed my life. Tiny decisions. Tiny mindset shifts. Tiny habits repeated consistently. At the time, none of them looked important. Years later, they became the foundation of everything. That's why I no longer disrespect slow progress. Because slow progress compounds. Quietly. Powerfully. And eventually, those tiny wins become visible transformation. That's when people suddenly notice your success. But by then, the real work already happened privately years earlier. That's the truth many people miss about growth. Transformation usually happens invisibly first, then visibly later. That's why patience matters so much. Because patience allows invisible growth to continue long enough to compound. And honestly, understanding that completely changed the way I view success. Now I respect consistency more than motivation, direction more than speed, and small wins more than dramatic moments. Because dramatic moments fade quickly, but repeated small behaviors quietly shape entire lives. So if your progress feels slow right now, keep going. Seriously. Tiny improvements still matter. Small habits still matter. Small wins still matter. Because sometimes the smallest changes are quietly building a completely different future underneath the surface. And one day, you'll look back and realize those tiny moments changed far more than you expected. There's something almost invisible about small progress. That's why people ignore it. Nobody feels powerful after saving $10. Nobody feels transformed after reading 5 pages. Nobody feels financially free after one good decision. And honestly, that emotional invisibility is dangerous. Because human beings naturally underestimate things that don't create immediate emotional rewards. That's why so many people abandon good habits too early. The results simply haven't become visible yet. I remember one period where my progress felt painfully slow. Every month looked almost identical. Small savings, small improvements, small habits. Nothing dramatic. And honestly, part of me felt stuck. Then one day, I looked back at where I had been financially a year earlier. That's when it hit me. My life had changed gradually without me noticing. I reacted to stress differently, spent money differently, thought differently. Even my emotional relationship with money had changed. That realization taught me something powerful. Progress is often too slow to notice daily, but impossible to ignore over years. That's why patience matters so much, because impatience blinds people to gradual transformation. And gradual transformation is how most real change happens. Especially financially. People think wealth is built through giant moments, huge investments, massive breakthroughs, overnight success. But honestly, most wealth is built through ordinary decisions repeated consistently. Tiny investments, tiny savings habits, tiny moments of discipline, repeated for years. That repetition creates compounding. And compounding is almost magical over long periods of time. Not because it's exciting immediately, because it becomes unstoppable eventually. That applies to habits too. Bad habits compound. Good habits compound. Tiny emotional reactions compound. Everything compounds. That's why small wins deserve attention. Because small wins determine direction. And direction determines future outcomes. I think many people secretly believe their small efforts don't matter. That belief destroys consistency. Because if progress feels meaningless, motivation disappears quickly. But honestly, small actions shape identity far more than people realize. Every repeated action sends your brain a message about who you are. Every time you save money, you reinforce discipline. Every time you invest, you reinforce long-term thinking. Every time you avoid emotional spending, you reinforce self-control. Those internal shifts matter enormously. Because eventually, identity becomes stronger than motivation. And identity drives long-term behavior automatically. That's why small wins are never truly small. They are identity training. Quiet identity training. Looking back now, many moments I once dismissed as insignificant became life-changing later. That's the strange thing about growth. You rarely recognize the important moments while they're happening. The tiny decision to become more consistent. The tiny habit that slowly changes behavior. The tiny improvement repeated long enough to become identity. Those moments quietly shape entire futures. And honestly, that's why I respect ordinary progress now. Because ordinary progress creates extraordinary results over time. Not immediately. Eventually. That's the part many people struggle with emotionally. The delay. The waiting. The invisible stage. But honestly, every meaningful transformation includes an invisible stage. That stage tests patience more than skill. And the people who survive that stage long enough usually create results others later call impressive. Even though the process itself looked boring most of the time. That's the irony of long-term success. It rarely feels dramatic while it's happening. One of the most dangerous habits people develop is constantly starting over. Monday motivation. New month motivation. New year motivation. Extreme goals. Extreme plans. Extreme expectations. And honestly, I lived like that for years. Every failure felt final. Every mistake felt catastrophic. So instead of building consistency, I kept rebuilding intensity. That cycle becomes exhausting emotionally, because intensity burns fast. But consistency survives longer. That realization changed my life completely. I stopped trying to become a different person overnight, and started focusing on becoming slightly better repeatedly. That mindset felt almost too simple initially, but simplicity is powerful, especially financially. Most people fail financially not because they lack information, but because they lack sustainable behavior. They try to change everything immediately, then collapse emotionally when perfection becomes impossible. That's why small wins matter so much. They create manageable progress. Progress your nervous system can actually sustain. That's important, because emotional overwhelm destroys consistency. I learned that the hard way. At one point, I became obsessed with fixing my life quickly, aggressive budgeting, no enjoyment, extreme saving, constant pressure. And honestly, it worked temporarily. Then eventually, I burned out completely. Not because discipline is bad, because unsustainable discipline eventually creates emotional rebellion. That's why balance matters. And balance grows slowly, through repeated manageable wins. That's something people rarely talk about honestly. Long-term growth should feel sustainable, not constantly punishing. Because if your system depends entirely on motivation, it eventually collapses during stressful seasons. But small, stable habits survive stressful seasons much better. That's why ordinary consistency beats emotional intensity long-term. Every time. And honestly, understanding that removed enormous pressure from my life. I no longer felt like every day needed to be perfect. I stopped viewing small mistakes as total failure. And strangely, that mindset improved my consistency dramatically. Because progress became emotionally safer. That matters more than people realize. People continue behaviors that feel emotionally survivable. And they abandon behaviors that feel emotionally exhausting. That's human psychology. That's why tiny wins create powerful momentum. Not because they look impressive, because they reduce emotional resistance. And reduced resistance makes consistency easier. That's where transformation begins. Not in giant moments. In repeated manageable actions. Quietly repeated long enough to become normal. I think one of the biggest lies people believe is that successful people always feel motivated. They don't. Most successful people simply continue during periods when motivation disappears. That's the difference. And honestly, small wins help people survive those periods emotionally. Because motivation is unreliable. Some days you feel inspired. Some days you feel exhausted. Some days progress feels exciting. Some days it feels pointless. That emotional inconsistency is normal. But habits reduce dependence on emotions. That's why habits are so powerful financially. You stop relying on temporary feelings and start relying on systems instead. That shift changes everything. I remember when saving money felt emotionally painful for me. Every dollar saved felt like deprivation, like sacrifice. But over time, something interesting happened. The habit became normal, not exciting. Normal. That's powerful psychologically. Because behaviors that become normal require less emotional energy. And reduced emotional friction creates consistency. That's why small wins matter. They slowly normalize positive behavior. The first investment feels scary. The 10th investment feels routine. The first disciplined financial decision feels difficult. Repeated disciplined decisions become identity. That's how transformation works psychologically. Slow normalization. Not instant perfection. And honestly, that understanding helped me stop judging myself so harshly during slow progress. Because slow progress is still rewiring behavior. Even when results aren't visible yet. That invisible rewiring matters enormously. Most people only focus on visible outcomes. Money. Results. External success. But internal transformation happens first. The mindset changes first. The habits change first. The emotional reactions change first. Visible outcomes arrive later. That's why patience matters so much. Because external success often lags behind internal growth. And honestly, many people quit during that delay, not realizing they were closer than they thought. That's tragic. Because consistent behavior almost always creates results eventually, especially over years. Years matter more than people realize. 1 year of small improvement changes little visibly. 5 years changes everything. That's the power of compounding. And honestly, compounding rewards patience more than talent sometimes. That's why small wins deserve respect. Because they are often early evidence of future transformation, even if nobody notices yet. Looking back now, I realize the biggest transformations in my life never started dramatically. No movie moment. No sudden breakthrough. No overnight success. Just tiny changes repeated consistently. That's it. And honestly, that realization feels strangely comforting now. Because it means your future doesn't depend on one perfect moment. It depends more on repeated direction, repeated effort, repeated decisions. That removes enormous pressure. You don't need to transform your entire life today. You simply need to continue moving in the right direction consistently. That's powerful. Especially financially. Because financial improvement often feels emotionally slow. But slow growth still changes lives. Quietly. Then permanently. I think people underestimate how much stability matters. Not excitement. Not dramatic success. Stability. The ability to handle problems calmly. The ability to avoid financial panic. The ability to think long-term instead of emotionally. Those qualities quietly create freedom over time, and small wins help build those qualities gradually. That's why they matter so much. Not because they impress other people. Because they reshape your internal life. Your confidence changes. Your habits change. Your emotional reactions change. Eventually, your entire future changes too. That's the hidden power of small progress. Most people only notice the visible outcome. But the real transformation happened long before anybody saw results. Quietly. Repeatedly. Ordinarily. That's how real change usually happens. And honestly, that's why I no longer disrespect tiny improvements. A tiny habit can become a completely different life years later. A tiny mindset shift can change financial behavior permanently. A tiny decision repeated consistently can alter your future completely. That's why small wins matter. Because eventually, they stop being small. At some point, I stopped chasing dramatic change completely. And honestly, that decision changed my life more than any motivational speech ever did. Because before that, I treated growth like an emergency. Everything needed to happen fast. Fast financial progress. Fast discipline. Fast results. And when reality moved slower than my expectations, I felt like I was failing. That mindset created constant frustration. Constant disappointment. Constant pressure. But eventually, I realized something powerful. Real growth usually feels ordinary while it's happening. That sentence changed how I viewed progress forever. Because when you stop expecting every improvement to feel exciting, you become more patient with reality. And reality is slow sometimes. Especially financially. Saving money takes time. Investing takes time. Building discipline takes time. Changing identity takes time. Everything meaningful usually grows slower than people expect. That's not failure. That's process. And honestly, accepting that removed enormous emotional pressure from my life. I no longer needed constant proof that I was succeeding. I stopped obsessing over visible outcomes daily. And instead, I started respecting consistency itself. That shift became powerful psychologically. Because consistency creates trust. Trust in your habits. Trust in your decisions. Trust in your future. And once you trust yourself, everything changes emotionally. You stop panicking after setbacks. You stop quitting after mistakes. You stop treating slow growth like failure. That emotional stability becomes a huge advantage over time. Especially in personal finance. Because money decisions are heavily emotional. Fear. Stress. Comparison. Impulse, pressure. Most people think financial success is mostly mathematical. But honestly, psychology controls behavior far more than spreadsheets do. That's why small wins matter so much. They slowly improve emotional behavior around progress. And emotional behavior shapes long-term outcomes. Looking back now, many of the people who improved their lives dramatically weren't the most talented. They were simply the most consistent. Not perfect. Consistent. That difference matters enormously. Because perfection creates pressure. Consistency creates momentum. And momentum quietly changes lives. That's why I respect ordinary effort now. Not because it looks impressive publicly. Because repeated ordinary effort creates extraordinary futures privately. That's the hidden truth many people miss. One of the strangest things about progress is that your life often changes internally long before it changes externally. At first, nobody notices anything. Your income may still look similar. Your routine may still look ordinary. Your results may still look small. But internally, everything starts shifting slowly. Your mindset becomes calmer. Your reactions become more disciplined. Your habits become more intentional. That invisible transformation matters enormously. Because eventually, internal changes create external outcomes automatically. That's how real growth works. Inside first, outside later. And honestly, I wish more people understood that. Because many people quit during the internal stage. The stage where growth feels emotionally invisible. But invisible progress is still progress. That realization helped me stay patient financially. Especially during periods where results felt painfully slow. I started focusing less on dramatic milestones and more on daily direction. Was I improving slowly? Was I thinking better? Was I making slightly stronger decisions repeatedly? That became enough. And strangely, once I stopped obsessing over immediate outcomes, my progress became more stable. Because emotional desperation disappeared. That matters. Desperation creates impulsive behavior. Patience creates sustainable behavior. That's true financially too. Desperate people chase shortcuts. Patient people build systems. And systems create stability over time. That's why I believe small wins are deeply underrated. Not because they transform your life instantly. Because they teach patience, discipline, emotional resilience, long-term thinking. Those qualities eventually become more valuable than motivation itself. And honestly, that's one of the biggest lessons life taught me. You don't need explosive progress constantly. You simply need direction. Repeated direction over long enough periods changes everything. Quietly. Then permanently. If there's one thing I've learned about growth, it's this: your life can change completely through tiny decisions repeated consistently. Not glamorous decisions. Not dramatic moments. Tiny ones. The decision to save a little money. The decision to keep going after setbacks. The decision to stay patient during slow progress. The decision to improve slightly instead of perfectly. Those moments look small while they're happening. But honestly, they shape entire futures. That's why small wins matter more than people realize. Because small wins create identity. And identity creates behavior. Behavior creates outcomes. That's how transformation actually happens. Quietly. Repeatedly. Ordinarily. I used to believe success belonged only to people with extraordinary talent. Extraordinary opportunities. Extraordinary luck. But now, I think consistency is far more powerful than most people understand. Because consistency survives emotions. It survives difficult seasons. It survives slow progress. And surviving slow progress is one of the rarest skills in modern life. Especially now, when everyone expects instant results. Instant money. Instant success. Instant transformation. But honestly, the best things in life often grow slowly. Very slowly. That's why patience becomes a superpower. Because patient people allow compounding enough time to work. Financial compounding. Habit compounding. Confidence compounding. Self-respect compounding. Everything compounds eventually. That's why tiny improvements should never be underestimated. A tiny habit repeated for years becomes identity. A tiny financial improvement repeated for years becomes stability. A tiny mindset shift repeated consistently becomes a different future entirely. That's the hidden power of small wins. And honestly, most people are closer to changing their lives than they realize. Not through one giant breakthrough, but through repeated ordinary decisions. That's comforting. Because it means transformation is accessible. Not easy. Accessible. And looking back now, I no longer disrespect slow growth. Slow growth taught me patience, discipline, self-trust, emotional resilience. Those qualities changed my life far more than motivation ever did. So if your progress feels invisible right now, keep going. Seriously. The small habits matter. The tiny improvements matter. The ordinary effort matters, even when nobody notices yet. Because one day, you'll look back and realize the life you wanted was quietly being built during the moments that felt the least impressive. And honestly, that's the real power of small wins.